We have not been talking much about hurricanes in the Atlantic so far this season, and today, September 10th, is typically the peak of the season. So far, we've seen only 6 named storms, only one of which was a Hurricane Erin, and we're joined by Fox Weather's tropical expert, Brian Norcross, to weigh in on this morning. Brian, thanks for coming in here and joining us today. We always don't want to jinx things. So far, we've been blessed with a quiet season, but things can change rapidly. Why, first of all, do you think that this season so far has been kind of held back a little bit less than what was forecast earlier this season?
Well, remember the forecast for the whole season. You're right, Mike. This is a repeat to some sense of last year. We had a gap in the season that we had trouble explaining, and we're not really totally sure what's going on. We can see when we look out over the Atlantic, there's a very strong high-pressure system out there, and unusually strong, as a matter of fact. And the circulation is like that. And on this side, that tends to drive dry air from the north to the south, and that is not conducive to what goes on down in here, which is where the main action area is. It also tends to suppress what's going on over Africa a bit, and that's where the seeds of the hurricane comes from. So we get some Sahara dust gets pushed out there. We have a band of thunderstorms called the ITCZ, Intertropical Convergence Zone, down to the south. That's a hostile zone. So we end up with a little tiny kind of chute that could be conducive for storms in this current regime. And so when we look at that high pressure, we're looking at it right now and saying, okay, what's going to happen? The forecast is for it to begin to weaken and move away. And we look at the moisture coming up here for next week. Some systems are forecast to move off Africa, kind of as the high pressure lets up a little bit. And we have an exclusive model here that combines the main forecast models, and that's showing some development in the Atlantic coming up later on next week as the starting point of this. And indications are, as we move forward into September and October, that the atmosphere is going to become more conducive, which is what happened last year. If you remember, the big hurricanes last year all started in the Caribbean and Gulf. So whether this is a trend or this is just something that's happening over these hurricane seasons, we don't know. But hurricane season isn't over is my message to folks in the hurricane
Exactly. Yeah, we had that incredibly quick intensifying Hurricane Erin, which fortunately was largely a fish storm. But to your point about late season storms, I mean, you think about Michael, Mitch, Wilma, and going back to 1954 with Hazel. We've had some doozies even in October. So this is not a time to let our guard down, is it?
Yeah, in Florida, as a matter of fact, October is just about exactly equal with September in terms of the likelihood of having a hurricane. So that's really hurricane season, really is September, October, occasionally late in August in Florida. That's not so in Texas. In Texas, if you don't get a storm earlier in the season, pretty much you're not going to get a hurricane. Very low odds. But the odds kind of shift around as we get to later in the hurricane season because the storms all want to come from the south and then veer to the east. And, of course, Florida's kind of in the way of that. It sticks out in the middle of Hurricane Alley as kind of a sore thumb. So here in Florida, we don't get over this until we get well into November.
One of the other factors that can be conducive for tropical cyclone formation, of course, is sea surface temperatures. How are we looking in the Atlantic? Still, there's a lot of warm water out there.
Yeah, the Atlantic, it's like the 6th warmest on record, looking all the way across the Atlantic. In the tropical Atlantic, it's plenty warm. There's no issue there. But in the Caribbean and the Gulf, it's exceptionally warm. So that's another reason why we think later in the season, the conditions overall will be conducive for storm development.
All right, Brian Norcross, don't be offended, but I hope we don't have to talk to you much for the rest of the season. Hope you know what that means.
Yeah. I hope so too, Mike. Yeah.
All righty. Well, thanks for joining us today.
Have a good day. It looks like a beautiful day in Chicago, man.
It sure is. Thanks for joining us and sharing your insight. Brian Norcross there with Fox Weather.